I'm going to talk about hardwood management and you know, kind of what the program is from my standpoint of trying to maintain and work in hardwood, some things like burning and stuff like that that you can actually do when hardwood stands and clean up and things like that as well. But that focus is kind of more along the lines of where I like seeing hardwoods is down in the bottoms and the wet soil types where hardwoods are supposed to be. And if you're doing what Claude was talking about, you know, a lot of prescribed burning and stuff, eventually that's where hardwoods end up. They're not that tolerant of fire, and they end up getting pushed down in the drains where the fires are either not, you know, burning through, or they're much less intense. And that's kind of where I think hardwoods need to be anyways. So, figure out how all this whole thing works. Panacea, what's wrong with this picture? That was my introduction. You know, what's good about hardwoods? They're a great food source. Acorn production obviously is something that turkeys can benefit from, and provide a, you know, high quality, high carb food source through the wintertime, anytime acorns are falling. And you know, they're a great species to have around, especially the older age class hardwoods that are producing acorns or soft mass, cherries, and during the summertime, persimmons, latter part of the summer, that type of thing. Especially in the wintertime, excellent roosting cover. There's a lot of food in the wintertime in those hardwood bottoms. Now the rest of the year, they typically are a habitat type that is lacking, you know, good quality food sources and good quality cover. But in the wintertime, turkeys will focus on that because of the acres. And the roosting cover is the same thing. They'll you know, get into these big hardwood bottoms, and there might be, you know, 75, 100, 150 turkeys, you know, roosted in these flocks in these hardwood bottom areas. And that's how these guys ended up having so many turkeys in the wintertime. Problem is, in the spring and really through the rest of the year, you get 4 or 5 months of good quality turkey use in these hardwood areas, and then all of a sudden, you know, the rest of the year, 9 more months, you've got turkeys scattered all over everywhere. And these hens will pack up their bags and start searching out nesting and brood rearing cover, and they may travel miles, literally. And that's what these guys and a lot of other clients I've run into over the years have had a problem with, is these turkeys will pack up their bags, the hens first, as soon as the flocks break up in the spring, you know, early part of March, mid part of March, and they'll pack up their bags and haul butt somewhere where they can find some of the habitat that Claude was talking about. Hardwoods also, you know, they're great for other critters. There's a lot of species that depend on hardwood bottoms. Gray squirrels, of course, you know, even though fox squirrels are kind of an upland pine species, they like hardwood bottom areas as well. And I kind of like fox squirrels anyway. They're just a neat critter. You don't see them a whole lot. They're kind of more focused on that mixed hardwood area with pine, a lot of burning. Tends to promote fox squirrels as well. Deer, you know, every hunter out here is, you know, that likes hunting deer is kind of looking at those hardwood bottoms, and again, it's the same thing. Wintertime during hunting season, the deer focusing on trying to find some acorns. And so they're utilizing the hardwood areas quite a bit as well. That's not to say pine, you know, doesn't have a whole lot of benefit for deer management. It does. So does the burning. But, you know, in the wintertime, when the acorns are falling, especially if we have a good acorn crop, that's where you're going to be finding the deer as well. So when you're talking about, just like Claude had said, you're talking about pine stand management, same thing with the hardwood stand management. You got to consider the life history of this critter, why you're doing what you're doing. Wintertime, these flocks are huge. They're sucking up, they're like vacuum cleaners, you know, they're sucking up all kind of food out there. They're running through these hardwood bottoms trying to eat everything they've got. And but by the time spring comes in this particular area, and I've turkey hunted this quite a bit myself as well, there's a big hardwood bottom here, and then in the backside to the south of this is a big pine ridge. This flock of massive quantities of 200 turkeys in a 200-acre field are now stand out there in the springtime. You hear 3 or 4 gobblers gobbling in the drain, maybe a bird or two back up in the piney woods. These birds right here would scatter miles around. They're right here, they're looking for winter food. In the springtime, they scatter out and they start finding that brood cover and nesting cover. And so this is a, and again, I should have kind of juxtaposed this with another picture of a standard hardwood forest that most people are familiar with. Has got that hardwood leaf understory. This is a thinned hardwood stand, and yeah, you're going to see some pines. I got a couple of pictures of this. You'll see some scattered pine, a couple of pictures that got several pines in there, big pine. But this is a classic Alabama river bottom hardwood forest right here. And that we had gone through and did some thinning on it, opened it up and this is almost specifically for turkeys. cleaned up this understory, did a little herbaceous woody control, and developed some understory cover in here. This is also a form of hardwood management right here, and Claude had kind of alluded to this some too. In the pine stand, classic thin piney woods that get choked up with sweet gums turns into nothing for wildlife, especially turkeys. Yeah, a turkey can work its way through this thing, but is there a reason for it too? Probably not. There's not any food growing up underneath the sweet gum canopy. You got the upper pine canopy, then you got the sweet gum canopy that's choking everything out. There's a few weeds in here, some dog fennel and things like that, but nothing high quality. And as time goes by without some herbicides and burning, these sweet gums end up just taking over that mid-story and shading out everything on the ground. You end up in the same situation as a closed canopy hardwood forest. No sunlight getting to the ground, therefore no food production on the ground. This is a good example of that Coosa County example I was talking about. And I see this over and over again, that especially in some of the folks who kind of been through that time frame when we didn't have turkeys, and the biologists and the game and fish and things like that were promoting this idea that turkeys need 5,000 acres of bottomland hardwood forest to exist. It's hard to change some of that concept over time. And so I see in a lot of cases landowners that have a mixed pine hardwood stand that they quit burning, that is allowed slowly over time to develop into a hardwood stand, and the pines die out. So you can see a couple scattered pine trees left in this little piece of woods right here. Most of the pine trees are laying on the ground out here, and they're just carcasses dead on the ground. This particular landowner, who's in Elmore County, was just letting those pine trees die. And he said, man, it's good turkey habitat. And he did have a lot of turkeys. But we also had a lot of pastures out here. We had some thin pine stands and things like that. We've kind of slowly but surely worked over most of his place and kind of on his uplands, taking spots like this, clear cut them, put back some pine on them. But this is a classic example of somebody who just leaves out the burning, lets the pine die in the name of good turkey habitat because hardwoods and turkeys go along well. This is a good example of that hardwood canopy I'm talking about. This is a young stand right here. This is a stringer drain in a quail plantation, but still qualifies, as a hardwood stand. And this is the type of stuff that in these bottomland areas, that's a drain where water comes through in the wintertime. The fires don't get down in it very much, and this is a regularly burned place. But the fires don't get down there very much because it's a wet soil area. Hardwood leaves don't burn as good. Even when it does burn through there, it doesn't burn hot, so it's not killing all these little hardwoods. And you end up with a nice little stand of, mixed oaks and various other species. But you end up with a lot of oak. And this is the type of stuff that turkeys will utilize heavily. Winter, spring, summer, doesn't really matter. They're small, narrow drainages in an open piney wood, so they can utilize everything out there. And in situations like that, where you've got burned piney woods, next to a young pine plantation, next to a hardwood stringer drain, which is adjacent to a big hardwood bottom, your turkeys don't have to take off 5 miles to go find nesting in brood cover in the spring. They'll sit right there on your place. So let's focus on each of these different types and what you're looking at and talking about, upland versus bottomland hardwood species. And again, this is a good picture of that burned upland hardwood stand. If you're dealing with upland hardwoods, I love seeing fire go through it. Typically, your upland hardwoods are fire-tolerant species. Not all of them. Burn it a couple times, you'll find out which ones are, which ones aren't. Because after about 3 or 4 burns, the ones that aren't very fire-tolerant, they fall over and they'll be laying on the ground, which is a good place for them. We don't need them there. Bottomland hardwoods, these are ones that are typically not going to be as fire-tolerant, and there's a reason. They grow around water, and in this case, that stand, we had burned that stand right there a month or so before. But still, when you get down near the water, the fires don't burn as hot. They creep on the ground quite a bit. And then obviously wet hardwoods, fire tolerance is pretty much irrelevant in there unless it's drought conditions. Cypress, tupelo, overcut, and nuttall, the ones you're going to see with their feet in the water on a regular basis. But these are also from a turkey standpoint, pretty important trees. So what management options are available for hardwood stands? This is another good example of kind of that mixed pine hardwood, more hardwood. This is a bottomland area, but it's got some pine trees scattered through it. But this just kind of junky. And while, you could find a turkey in there, and you know, they utilize that stuff. There's certainly a lot of options for cleaning up stands like this. So you got a lot of options available, not as many as pine. There's not as many management alternatives, and certainly not the window that you can use through the seasons. For instance, summer burning. You know, burning a pine stand, you can burn it 12 months out of the year. Burn a hardwood stand, you got to be real careful about when you burn. So, you know, disking and planting. If you're going to open up a hardwood stand to grow some of that understory grasses that we talked about, the weeds and the blackberries and the broom straws, you don't have so many options of how to manage that as you do in a pine stand. You've got plenty of options how to maintain that hardwood, that herbaceous understory in a pine stand. Not so many options in a hardwood stand, which you end up with lack of management. You end up getting that thick undergrowth that just chokes everything else out on the ground, and you just end up with nothing. Closed canopy hardwoods, kind of hit on some of this already, very little wildlife value. You think about it from, you know, this standpoint right here, there's nothing in there. If you're a deer, if you're a turkey, if you're a quail, there's really nothing in there to eat. And there's no cover value. If you're a turkey poult or something like that, there's just no cover value, you know, in this stand right here. So timber management in general, this is kind of objective what you're after right here. This thing was a heck of a hardwood log, if I remember right, 44 inches at the butt. Beautiful tree, and these guys are just whacking it up into logs to throw it on a truck and get it out of there. But you know, this is the kind of thing you're trying to develop over the long haul. That tree was 60-something years old right there, and you know, try and develop as many of those as possible. That's big, you know, big money. This was a section of that clear cut area. Actually, this was a different spot. You know, this was one that we actually clear cut, put longleaf back on. Upland site, it was predominantly hardwood, and you know, again, one of those junk stands. We cut most of the pulpwood off of it, but you know, clear cut is, whether you're talking about hardwood or pine, the most viable regeneration technique. And if you're talking about hardwoods, and this again is not a bottomland area, this was more of an upland, but if you're talking about clear cutting in hardwood areas, you know, replant or resprout seedling in place is your best two methods to really regenerate a hardwood stand. Replanting, obviously, best done in this manner. I don't think anybody in here wants to really go out and do it yourself. Replanting thousands and thousands of seedlings is backbreaking labor. This is another alternative in if you're talking about stuff that you can't get a logger on. The saplings are too small. Hardwood pulp market is terrible, which is not that great right now. Clearing through with one of these woodland mulchers is an alternative. This head has got I think 60-something teeth on it that are kind of knuckle teeth. They're just about the size of your fist, and they beat the stew out of stuff is basically what they do. High RPM, and run through and just, you know, eat this junk up like this right here and turn it into mulch. You know, burning through these hardwood stands, and that was an upland stand, this is more of a bottomland type here. Burning through these stands, just got to be real careful. It's feasible. People tell you all the time, oh, you can't burn hardwoods, don't burn hardwoods. You know, be afraid, be very afraid. You know, you do take a risk, there's no question about it, especially when you're burning through bottomlands, of damaging, having a butt scar on a higher quality oak tree. You can minimize that risk by burning the right conditions and being real careful and making sure your fires are slow. This is another, you know, post-burn, good example of the same type of thing. This is a burn stand in the Alabama River, and you know, you can go down there. This fire here was 6-7 years ago, but it's been burned one other time since then. And you walk through that stand, you can't find a butt scar anywhere. Again, because it was a very careful fire, but it helps. And in this case, there was some logging debris through here, and a lot of little sapling junk, and just an occasional burn to try and keep that clean. What little bit of vegetation growing on the ground, we want to keep it kind of stimulated to keep growing. But it's something that can be done. Just make sure it's not too hot and helps clean up that debris.